Now, Iran is emerging as a key beneficiary of the ongoing energy disruption triggered by the conflict in the Gulf. As global oil prices surge past $100 per barrel, Tehran has managed to keep its crude exports relatively stable at around 1.5 to 1.6 million barrels per day. And this combination of steady volumes and elevated prices is significantly boosting revenues. Estimates suggest Iran's daily oil earnings have nearly doubled compared to pre-conflict levels, strengthening its fiscal position despite the ongoing sanctions. While other producers struggle with supply disruptions, Iran is effectively capitalizing on higher prices without needing to ramp up output. Amid heightened tensions, tanker traffic has been disrupted across the Strait of Hormuz, a critical passage vital for global trade. Iran's strategic position along the strait gives it significant leverage over global energy flows. With competing exports facing bottlenecks, Iran's ability to influence or restrict movement is tightening global supply and pushing prices higher. And despite sanctions, Iran's oil exports continue through a well-established network of unofficial channels. A large shadow fleet of tankers and discounted crude sales, particularly to Asian buyers, have helped sustain export volumes. As supply from other producers becomes uncertain, buyers are increasingly turning to available and consistent sources. And this is allowing Iran to maintain its market presence even in a volatile environment. And to discuss the evolving situation, we are now being joined live on the broadcast by Dr. Amir Javed Anfud. He is a lecturer of Iranian politics at the Reichman University in Israel and co-author of The Nuclear Sphinx of Tehran. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Now, let's begin. Absolutely. Now, according to the report, as we mentioned, Iran is now earning nearly twice as much from oil sales each day as it did before the war. Is Iran proving that these sanctions can no longer cripple oil economies?
I think, first of all, this is a boon for Iran. This is an achievement because President Trump, because of America. On the one hand, the United States is attacking Iran from the 28th of February. But on the other hand, the United States, one of the impediments and one of the obstacles to its success in the current war is the rising price of oil. So the United States is in a predicament here. On the one hand, it wants to, of course, undermine Iran's economy because, as the saying goes, armies win battles, economies win wars. But on the other hand, President Trump is very worried about the rising cost of oil per barrel. And if he restricts and stops Iranian oil exports, then that would shoot up the price of oil even higher in the global market, thus undermining President Trump's achievements in the war and perhaps shortening the length of the war, which could mean that the United States would risk not achieving all its objectives. So the Americans are in a serious predicament here, and it seems that, as the saying goes, the easiest option for them, the least costly option for them, is to allow their enemy to continue selling oil and to continue earning money from its biggest exports, because the alternative would be much worse.
And so does this also prove that can Iran really be winning if its economy and infrastructure are under attack even now with the Israeli attacks?
Overall, strategically, this is a tactical victory for Iran during the war, absolutely, that it's selling more oil. But overall, Iran, the question is, can Iran leverage and turn the extra income from the oil to significantly boost its military capabilities and its performance during the war? Theoretically, yes. In reality, unlikely, because Iran is facing some of the toughest sanctions since, well, it is one of the most sanctioned countries, especially after Venezuela was removed from that list. So Iran, until now, what it can do is to perhaps it's selling its oil mainly to China. The Chinese aren't willing to transfer money. What they do is they create credit accounts, and Iran can, based on the amount of money that it earned from the sale of oil to China, can buy Chinese products and Chinese services. That is not going to allow Iran that is not going to significantly boost Iran's capabilities. It will have an impact, but it's not going to be boosting Iran's capabilities significantly, because not everything that Iran needs, China can supply. There was another option until recently to transfer money back to Iran, and that was through companies in Dubai. The Iranians had front companies in Dubai in order to circumvent sanctions. But after Iran's repeated attacks against the United Arab Emirates, that is not going to be possible. The Emirati authorities are expelling and closing down such Iranian companies. So one of the only ways left for Iran is just to buy Chinese products from Chinese companies, and that restricts its options.
So now when U.S. President Donald Trump, when he says that he wants Iran's oil, and when this report shows that how Iran is actually earning by controlling the Strait of Hormuz in this conflict, is a ground invasion on Kurg actually a way out for Trump to open the Strait of Hormuz?
First and foremost, I think it would be interesting for your viewers to know why President Trump wants Iran's oil. The United States is one of the biggest exporters and actually of oil and gas these days. And the United States is also earning a lot of money from the high price of oil brought about as a result of this war. But when President Trump says, I want Iran's oil, he has China in mind, because he wants to strengthen his hands vis-a-vis the Chinese in the trade negotiations, because the Chinese right now have a much stronger hand as opposed to the US because of their control over the processing of rare minerals. So to strengthen America's hand, President Trump removed Venezuelan oil, which was being sold to China, and now he wants to remove Iranian oil being sold to China in order to strengthen America's hands vis-a-vis China in the trade talks. Now, to answer your question, does this mean that a ground invasion will happen? I think yes. I think it's quite likely, because Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, taking over and closing the Strait of Hormuz is a geo-economic move on a global scale. This is something that affects most countries of the world. This is a move that affects especially Western economies. The Islamic Republic of Iran has had a very problematic relations with Western countries since the 1979 revolution. It has adopted a very aggressive and militaristic policy towards some of them, including the United States, including the Europeans, through terror operations on European soil and supplying UAVs and drones to Russia, which has ruined Ukraine and thus pushing the Europeans to spend their hard-earned money defending Ukraine. Therefore, there are not a lot of countries in the West and in the Persian Gulf countries, let's not also forget that they are the most important, who are willing to live with Iran's new policy of control over the Strait of Hormuz. And this makes it inevitable for President Trump to try to change the status quo ante to what it was before the war, when all ships could pass through the Strait of Hormuz.
So now let's also come to China, because you mentioned, and Iran has said that it will allow a restricted number of oil tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and with the, also demanding, money for that. And they've also demanded that this should be traded in Chinese yuan. So, of course, as you mentioned, China is playing an active role in this, allowing the money to flow. Iran's war chest, of course, is now buried deep in Asia, which is, of course, how do you assess China's role, and how will Iran actually benefit from this when we say that, yes? And you mentioned it's not a long-term plan. Why do you say that?
Well, first and foremost, why does Iran want yuans? Because when the money it receives can directly be deposited in Chinese banks. So all the oil that passes in dollar is sanctioned. Iran cannot receive money in dollars, but it can receive in yuans, which is why it's asking to be paid in yuans. And it also wants to boost its relationship with the People's Republic of China. Now, this is going to be important, Iran being able to sell oil, more oil now than before the war, is a significant psychological boost to the Islamic Republic of Iran, to its leadership. It's a major achievement for them. But we always have to ask, can it change Iran's strategy in the long run? To do so, Chinese products and services have to be able to meet all of Iran's needs. Now, first and foremost, they can meet some of Iran's needs, but not all of them. Iran is in badly need of investment and technology for its energy sector, for its gas sector, for its oil sector, for energy production sector, for its worsening water problems. Not all Chinese companies are going to be willing to sell their products to Iran because they could be sanctioned by the United States. And that means losing their entire market to the Western economies just for selling one product to Iran. And not many Chinese companies would be willing to take such a risk. So what the Chinese will be willing to offer Iran for the oil money that it is receiving in yuan will be limited. So this is not going to meet some of Iran's most strategic needs, and especially regarding its economy. But as I said earlier, it is a major psychological boost for them because everybody worried in Iran that as soon as there's war, Iran will no longer be able to export oil. But now the opposite is happening. It is exporting oil and more than before.
That's a very interesting point you put out there. And at the same time, should I just mention, it's not just Iran. Of course, we have Israel, who has now increased its wartime budget to $271 billion. It's interesting to see if you could just very shortly answer on that. How is, Israel, I mean, the one who's losing right now economically is probably just U.S.
No, the Americans are selling more oil than before. Some Americans, and high energy prices are to the benefit of the U.S. They're the biggest gas exporter, if I'm not mistaken, or one of the biggest because of the shale gas revolution. So they are doing okay. What they're worried is global pressure from other countries who are paying more for their energy, and that's driving down the stock exchange, and those countries pressuring President Trump to end the war. That's the problem for President Trump. For the state of Israel, let's not forget that it was the Islamic Republic of Iran that declared war through its proxies against Israel in 1991. And we saw it again 2 days after the 7th of October massacre, when Iran sent Hezbollah to fight Israel, to help Hamas, who just carried out the biggest massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust. And fighting Iran is inevitable for any Israeli government, be it the current one or the opposition. And this is why they have increased the military budget to fight Iran directly and to fight Iran's proxy in Lebanon, namely Hezbollah.
Well, of course, it is yet to see if this negotiations come by. So far, it doesn't seem to be.
Can I just make one recommendation?
Absolutely.
President Trump makes a lot of statements. He's the most powerful man in the world, but you can't take everything he says as face value. When he says Iran's accepted all his 15 demands, it's possible, but always a little bit of pinch of salt.
Well, of course, it's never to see if he says true or not, he acts on it or not. Of course, we'll have to wait and see in the future for that to happen. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and giving your analysis on this.
Thank you.